Good afternoon. My name is Dan Wright. I'd like to welcome you to our first edition of the TechDiver podcasts. Our first guest is my friend Kevin Juergensen, the owner and president of Juergensen Marine. Around an inherently safe system design, which is complete double redundancy.
Okay.
How did you evolve into the rebreather market?
Okay. I grew up in a small town called San Pedro, California, and it's right on the ocean. And so, of course, all of us kids, we grew up on the beach, spending time swimming, surfing, doing things like that. When I was about 15 years old, I had a friend of mine who had taken the YMCA scuba class and had a shiny Voight regulator and a I think it was a Steel 72. And he was tired of it. He didn't like doing it. And I had been snorkeling a lot at a place called Abalone Cove off of the cliffs in San Pedro, Rancho Palos Verdes. So I forgot what I traded him for it, but he wanted to trade me something. So all of a sudden I had a scuba tank and regulator. And I went down to a place called Pacific Sporting Goods, and I picked up a spear gun because I like the idea of, Mike Nelson and being all the underwater hunting fish and such. So together with another buddy of mine named Victor Lopez, we used to start diving off of the coast of California, and that's how I got my start in being a scuba diver. Not a hardcore technical diver or anything. Just a guy, kid strapping a tank on his back. And when I was 10 years old, I met the guys at Pacific Sporting Goods. And I don't even know if they're still in business. But I started buying archery equipment from them because I got into archery. So they knew me. So when I came in there at 16 or so and I had a scuba tank, they would fill it for me. And so I wound up being able to fill my scuba tanks at Pacific and then go scuba diving with it. So later, I wound up going to college in upstate New York, and I wound up becoming a filmmaker. And so I produced mostly human interest documentaries. I eventually got into doing science documentaries, space. I did a series with Joseph Campanella as a host called Every Man's Guide to the Planets. Because as a kid, I loved dinosaurs and planets and all that stuff. So I wound up producing that series. That ran on PBS, Pacific Mountain Network picked it up. And then the Discovery Channel was just starting. And they saw it, and they contacted me, and they said, hey, can you do the same thing, only this time with the universe? So, of course, I said yes. And I wound up producing a 10-part series on the universe and wound up getting Tom Selleck as host for that. And during the production of that one was called The Practical Guide to the Universe. We were shooting in Hawaii because it had all the different sets we needed. And so while I was editing that series at VidCom, the company went into bankruptcy. It was a publicly traded company, and it wound up going into bankruptcy. And so the general manager of the company came to me and he said, hey, have you ever thought about buying a post house, a post-production facility? And no, I had never thought about that. I didn't know a thing about bankruptcy law or whatever, but I decided to take it on. And within, I guess, about 6 months, I all of a sudden owned a 10,000 square foot facility in the heart of the media district in Burbank with about 25, 30 employees. And I was 32 years old. I was producing a television series with Tom Selleck. I had this beautiful corner office. I was just, like what should have been a dream come true. So I did what any entrepreneur would do in that situation. I called my executive producer at Discovery Channel and I said, hey, I own a I own a post-production facility now. If you guys got anything you need edited, give me a call. So, trying to generate more business. So about a week or two later, they called me and they said, actually, we do have something we need you to help us with. There's a young guy who took over his father's film company who's producing a underwater show on Atlantis, and he needs some help finishing it. So can we send him over to you? And I said, sure. So I guess about a week later, this fella comes to my office with his wife, and his name was John McKinney. And he was the son of Jack McKinney, and he had taken over his father's filmmaking company, and he was producing this film. So we worked together. I helped him finish the film. It was a success, and we liked each other a lot. So he asked me at one point, he said, are you a diver? And I said, well, yeah, I'm a scuba diver, but not like, I'm not Joe Diver. I'm not like a, super duper scuba diver. So he said, well, you'll become one if we work together. And so we decided to work together. And I wrote up a bunch of proposals for films, for a series of films for Discovery Channel. They bought them. And next thing you know, I'm producing underwater wildlife documentaries. It was just like that. And of course, I learned how to become a much better diver working with John. Obviously, he had a lot more experience than me. It was pretty much a throw you in the water and see how it goes situation. The first shark feeding frenzy that I got into was pretty hilarious because we were getting attacked from all sides by sharks. We were about 130 feet deep, and I was the guy that carried the chum bucket down. Of course, give it to Kevin. He'll do it. And so I carried the chum bucket down. Plus I had the spear gun because I had all that experience as a younger man, shooting fish. So as the fish would come up to the chum bucket to nibble off of it, I would shoot some, and then I would gut them underwater and wave them and set them off. One thing led to another. The sharks started coming in. More sharks. It got to a point where they were everywhere. I mean, we were just surrounded by sharks. We're in about 120 feet of water, and they start bumping into us, and I'm getting banged into by sharks. And I'm thinking, well, I got to be cool because, John's done this stuff his whole career. This must be how it goes, right? and I looked over at John, and he's doing this with his camera. He's literally trying to beat the sharks away from him with his camera. And that's when I said, I think we ought to go. Maybe we should bust on out of here. So anyway, we wound up leaving. He showed up in Fiji, and he had this giant black box. And I said, what's that? And he said, this is a rebreather. And I said, what's a rebreather? And he said, oh, it's really cool. You could stay underwater for like 8 hours, and there's no bubbles. So I watched him dive it, and I said, well, I got to have me one of them rebreathers. So I contacted the fellow that had sold it to him, and I put one on order for myself. And sure enough, about 5-6 months later, I got this big giant box delivered to me. And but my rebreather was slightly bigger than John's. It was slightly taller than John's, and it was plumbed. The plumbing was different inside of it. So I called up the fellow who I bought it from, Dick King, and I said, why is mine different? And Dick said, well, you got a Mark 16. John has a 15.5. And I thought, well, a 16's better than 15 and a half, so I must have a better rebreather.
Who was diving rebreathers at first who was not military? And who could fix the electronics?
There was only about 6-7 people in the whole world outside the military that was diving rebreathers. I think Howard Hall, Bob Cranston, Marty Snyderman was one of the first, John McKinney, Rod Farb. and then me, and then I believe Mark Thurlow after that. And Bob Cranston, of course, was one of the original ones too. Anyway, none of us knew how to fix the damn thing. I mean, there was no way to repair them. The pneumatics people knew how to fix, but the electronics, nobody understood the electronics. And so one day I just decided out of the blue that I was going to learn how to fix the electronics, how to recreate them, how to build my own. And as I tell everybody, the funny thing about it is I don't have a engineering education. I'm not an engineer. I didn't know a capacitor from a resistor, from a diode. I didn't know the first thing about it. But I lived about 2-3 blocks away from a place called Electronic City in Burbank. And so, and I didn't have any children. I wasn't married, so I was able to go there and pester the guys and ask them about this and about that, and they would explain what a diode did and what a operational amplifier was and how they're used, etc. So one thing led to another. Eventually, I got the very first set to work. And I remember calling my girlfriend in at the time, who later became my wife. And I was like, look, look, look. And there was all these wires and cables and things coming off of it. And there was a LED or a light bulb on the primary display. And the solenoid was click, 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 click. And she was like, okay, that's great. It's like she didn't understand it. But that was the very beginning of Juergensen Marine. That's what got me started in the building scuba diving equipment. And one thing led to another. It just blew up from there. The internet was just coming into its own. People were using bulletin board services for scuba. And a lot of people would be on there saying, hey, I saw these guys on TV the other night on Discovery Channel wearing these black things on their backs. And I'd be like, oh, that was me and my partner, John. That was our film, Masters of the Sea. And then people would say, well, can you make one for me? And I was like, no, I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a rebreather mechanic. My career kind of happened to me in a way. There's a confluence of events. There's a gentleman that was in the Navy, the U.S. Navy. He's a friend of mine now. And he was given the task of dealing with about 45 to 50 Mark 15 rebreathers that they were decommissioning at Pearl Harbor. They were replacing them with Mark 16s. They had all these rebreathers they didn't know what they were going to do with. And he had to choose between destroying them, grinding them up, smashing them, whatever, or somehow disposing of them through the military surplus, which is called DRMO. And the guys that worked for him, the sailors that worked for him, didn't really feel like smashing shit. It was a hot day, I guess. So he said, just pull the electronics out of them and throw them in the DRMO pile. So they put them in their anvil cases. They took the electronic modules out of them, and then they put them into a container. And that got auctioned off at one point. And there was a fella in Hawaii named Bruce who bought them. And he went on the internet, was looking to see if there was anybody who knew the electronics of a Mark 15. And there happened to be one guy in Burbank, California named Kevin that was talking about how he had built a set of electronics for the Mark 15. So he contacted me and he said, can you build electronics for these things? And I said, yeah, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not interested in that. I'm in the middle of making all these films. I was traveling 200 days a year. And, filmmaking is quite a big job all by itself. Plus, I still had the post-production company, managing all those people, which was quite a task. Anyway, eventually, I sent him to Dick King. And he sent 2 units to Dick, and Dick never got back to him. So he was really mad that he thought Dick was stealing from him. It turned out that Dick was, I think, battling some health issues. But so he called me up, and I was kind of mad that Dick hadn't taken care of him. And I said, you know what? Send me a unit and let me see what I could do. So he shipped one to me, and I looked it over. I thought, well, I can build these. And he asked me at the time, he said, can you put electronics in two of them for me? And I said, it's going to be a lot of hassle and time and energy. And he said, how about if I give you all of them and if you send me two back? So he offered me almost 50 Mark 15 rebreathers in exchange for two of them rebuilt. Now, I don't want to make the story sound too great because these things were really trashed. I mean, they were broken. The fiberglass cases, a lot of them were snapped. They were missing parts. None of them had electronics. I mean, it was like, oh, here, I'll give you a whole bunch of garbage in exchange for, you polishing a couple of pieces up. But what it did do is it formed the basis for me to have all these systems sitting in my backyard in anvil cases.
Is it true that many of the rebreathers on the market today started out with Juergensen Marine electronics?
I kind of threw myself into restoring these rebreathers as like therapy. It gave me something to do with my hands. It gave me, it kind of helped me cope with some of it. And there was something I could fix, something I could rebuild. I couldn't fix what was happened to my father. But, and that eventually propelled me into the rebreather business because it was just starting. There was AP Valves didn't sell rebreathers at the time. The only other rebreather that was out there was the very first Cislunars, the Mark V. And Dick King, who was making the BMR 500, which he only sold about 20 of them, 30 of them, I think. So I kind of, by default, became one of the first rebreather manufacturers, technically. I guess rebreather restorer versus manufacturer. But I was building original electronics. And I thought, well, do I want to go and travel 200 days a year and be away from my son, my brand new little baby boy? Or do I want to stay home and build these rebreathers? And I had already produced a bunch of movies. I had won all kinds of awards and things. I had plenty of money. So it wasn't like I had to prove something. I was 41 years old. And I thought, I want to stay home. I want to be with my kid. And so the rebreathers and scuba became my new profession. I had founded Juergensen Marine in 1996. And I'd made a partnership, not a partnership, but a friendship with Will Smithers, who had taught me to go from analog to digital, which when I first started working with Will, I remember him telling me, he says, why do you make these things analog? I said, what do you mean? He said, why don't you do digital? And I said, Jesus Christ, dude, I barely know analog. And you want me to try to do digital? He said, oh, I'll teach you. Not a problem. It's easy. You got it. You've already done it this much. You'll be able to get it. I said, okay. So Will started helping me, and that just progressed, and then the business took off. It just, from there.
When Juergensen Marine was founded in 1996, you had one set of electronics. Tell us how you evolved from that point all the way to Tiger Shark.
So the reason I formed Juergensen Marine was the very first customers that I had, the very first two customers I had two really, really close friends. One of them's dead, one's still alive. Hal Gartner was a good friend of mine, and he was a lawyer. He represented doctors and hospitals in malpractice. So he was on that side of it. And the other one was Dr. Peter Heseltine, who was the chief physician of County USC Hospital in LA. He is an infectious disease specialist. He had written over 200 papers on AIDS. He was very big in the early days of the AIDS epidemic, sorting that out. And they both came to me and they said, "We want you to build us these analog electronics that you've done." And I said, "Well, they took so much time to build. I mean, they really did. I was hand making the boards. I was literally hand making the PCBs. I was then populating them by hand, and it was a tremendous amount of work." And they said, "Well, is there any way how could you make it easier?" And I said, "These boards, the PCBs should be made professionally." And they said, "Well, why don't you do that?" And I said, "Well, it's like $2,000. And they they said, "Well, if we each give you $1,000, you can go make those boards. Will you provide us with sets?" And I said, "Sure." So the deal was they would give me the money. I would buy 50, I think it was 50 sets of PCBs, printed circuit boards. And then I would supply each of them with 2 sets of electronics for their rebreathers. So they would have a set of electronics for their rebreather and a spare. So that basically launched Juergensen Marine. When I asked, I formed the company because I'd been in business all my life. I've always had my own companies. I've only had 2 jobs in my life, and I quit both of them. So I've always worked for myself. So I formed the company. I put my name on it. And the reason I put my name on it, it was a joke in the early days. I used to say, people say, "Well, why didn't you call it, AP Valves," or, all the other names people were picking, like Interspace Systems Corporation that Leon used, and Cislunar Technologies, when a rebreather has nothing to do with the moon. And I said, my joke is that I called it Juergensen Marine so you'd know who to blame. That was kind of what I decided to do. From that point, when I started building those analog electronics, is when I met Will Smithers. Will Smithers was an absolute genius. He was just a remarkable person. Anybody who knew Will knows that. He's so brilliant when it came to electronics, to code, to concepts. I mean, he became quite wealthy because of his ability to take a gambling program that he had been working on and make it work for program trading in Wall Street. It was pretty smart, that connection. And so he decided to help me, teach me digital. And we developed the Smithers Juergensen first generation digital set. And then we came up with the second generation. And then eventually we came up with the third generation. The third generation incorporated the decompression algorithm. The funny story about Will, I don't know if too many people know this anymore. The old guys would remember it. But there was a dive computer, I think it was called the Aladdin back in the old days. I think it was Aladdin. If I get it wrong, I hope the guy isn't mad at me. But Will, the guy who owned the company, had a software update. And Will asked him if he would just give him the update because it was just a bug fix. And the guy said, "No, you got to pay." And it made Will so mad that he went and paid somebody to translate the Buellman's book on decompression. And he created a decompression program. He called it Z Planner because his cat was named Z. And he gave it away. It was free. And I thought that was just such a brilliant move. It was like a big middle finger, to the corporate and the corporate aspects of early scuba. It's the same today, I guess, but people don't do stuff like that anymore. But he did.
Which generation of Juergensen Marine electronics did the Megalodons first use?
After we came up with the third generation digital computer, which, by the way, the third generation digital computer that Will and I built, that Will designed and I built, was the very first electronics in the Megalodon. The Megalodon used our second generation, and then they used the third generation. And then Leon came up with his own set. He was working with a fellow named Steve, and they came up with their Apex, I believe is what he called it. But the very first sets that they used was my electronics. The very first sets that Peter Reedy and Steam Machines used were my analog sets. We have a lot of history of helping other people kind of start their companies a little bit. That doesn't get talked about a lot because, everyone is the author of their own heroic story, right?
How long have you been in development of the Tiger Shark electronics?
So the Tiger Shark development is the longest development project I have ever been involved with in my entire career. It has taken probably 5-6 years. And the reason, part of the reason why that's happened is in the middle of the development program is bisected by COVID. What happened is we had fixed our design. We're working on coding, and then out of nowhere, the COVID pandemic happens. One of the functions of that, one of the things that happened with the COVID was the microchip shortage. All of a sudden, the microchips weren't being made. So we started struggling and scrambling to find microchips that we could get we could use in the Tiger Shark design. Unfortunately, everything that was of a quality that we were picking for the Tiger Shark was being snapped up by the car companies. The car companies needed these high performance RISC-based processors and such, and they were buying them all up. They were unavailable, so we had to start shifting towards other microcontrollers. Eventually, with the whole world being shut down, it became almost impossible to get any work done from the PCB houses, from the actual coders themselves. So by the time we resumed our production, our development, the high performance microcontrollers were coming back. And it was like, well, if I have a choice as a manufacturer between using something that's less than optimal versus using something that's I really want, that fits our future roadmap for the product, I'm gonna spend the time and energy and money to go for that. And so we went back to the high performance chips, and then of course we had to rewrite all the code. We had to change a lot of the footprint of the set, and then we had to adapt the housing in order to accommodate that.
What is the ultimate plan for the Tiger Shark electronics, and is the standalone going to be the real moneymaker?
My goal in developing the Tiger Shark was, first of all, there was a time when Juergensen Marine was the only game in town. We controlled the Rebreather controller market. It was if you wanted a Rebreather controller in the early days, you talked to Kevin. Then Bill Stone and Nigel Jones developed their own for the Cislunar Mark V. The Cislunar Mark V controller is one of the most complicated sets of controllers you could ever possibly imagine. I could write a book on how complicated that set is. We are the rebuild facility for the Cislunar Mark V. So I know the system very well. And then later, AP Valves developed their own set. So, but for a time, I had the lock on the market. I knew Kevin Gurr. I liked Kevin Gurr. We were friends. And I remember he was going to build a standalone dive computer. And I said, well, I've got the Rebreather controller, and Kevin's going to develop the standalone dive computer, the VR2, I think it was. I don't want to compete with him because I like him, which is silly when you think about it. It was me acting like I was in a kindergarten trying to be the nice guy, because Kevin had no compunctions about coming after the controller market, obviously. So ultimately, when when I went to develop the Rev D, this is a really good explanation of the the Rev D, why it wound up the way it did. When I was going to develop the Rev D, we had just developed the military set for the U.S. Navy. And the military set for the U.S. Navy is a completely different animal. Involves a lot of specialized electronics and controls and structure that is not necessary for a civilian set. But a lot of the principles of that set found its way into the Rev D, good and bad. The worst part of that wound up in the Rev D was having a completely separate graphic display unit, a printed circuit board that was designed to drive the graphics only. Now we added a few elements to it. We put the Bluetooth module on it. We put the GPS module on it. But essentially, it was a completely separate board. Well, that stacking tolerances made for a very thick unit. The second thing that went into the Rev D was in talking to a lot of my friends who were older. They had always said to me, "Oh, Kevin, nobody cares about color. Make it bigger. It's got to be bigger. We want it big," you know. And I think I took that a little too literally, and I didn't go for color.
Why was Shearwater so successful?
Now, the genius of Bruce Partridge is he somehow knew that people wanted color, that color was going to be important, and that packing every single feature that you could into a set would just make it bigger, and that what people really wanted was small and color. He had a winning display. Now, the rest of the Shearwater, and I don't want to bash anybody, that's not my purpose, but the rest of the Shearwater is kludgy as hell. I mean, in order to have a controller, you had to have the cylinder at first that had the connectors on the ends, and there were separate batteries and all that kind of stuff. The Rev D controls the heads-up display, a solenoid, a GPS module, a compass, a Bluetooth. I mean, it had everything in it. It does all of it in a relatively small space. If you took a Shearwater and their power pack that controlled the solenoid and the heads-up display and put the two of them together, they were bigger than the Rev D. But see, that's not what mattered to people. What mattered to people was what they saw on their wrist. And that was, like I said, I'm giving him all credit for that. So when I decided to do the Tiger Shark, I said to myself, there's a couple of things that you got to do. First of all, you have to be as good as the Shearwater. That's number one, right? You can't come up with something that's inferior to what they have. It's a product that everybody knows, everybody's familiar with. It's obviously it's proved itself. There's thousands and thousands of them all over the place.
Are you going to service the legacy customers as you move forward to the Tiger Shark? Is there going to be any backward compatibility?
I find very important is it had to take care of my legacy customers. We have gone now through 5 different iterations of Rebreather controllers. And if you have a Rev A rebreather, a hammerhead with Rev A electronics on it, and you come to me and say, "Kevin, can I upgrade to a Tiger Shark?" I say, "Yeah, absolutely." Everything remains the same. We take care of our legacy customers. So if you have a Rev A hammerhead and you buy a Tiger Shark, we will be able to put a Tiger Shark on your Rev A equipped device, whatever it is. If it's an Inspiration, if it's a Megalodon, whatever it might be, a Mark 15, we'll be able to fit that on there. So we're going to be able to service our legacy customers. At the same time, we're also able to move into the future with a separate board that connects via CAN bus. So we have both CAN bus and analog controls on the Tiger Shark, so it does both. The other thing that we did with the Tiger Shark is we gave it the capability to be a standalone dive computer with a AA battery, very low power consumption, regular open circuit dive computer, all the way up to a 18650 powered rebreather controller that can be configured either as a primary, secondary type of situation, or a primary with a secondary controller in the head communicating over CAN bus. So we've got a wide variety of capability built into one system. So it's very efficient, and it's going to help us move this product into the next 20, 30 years.
How are you going to compete with Shearwater, considering they have such a hold on the marketplace?
The way that we're going to be able to compete with Shearwater is there's a number of new rebreather manufacturers who have not been able to get access to Shearwater. They have decided that some companies they're not going to support. That is one of the entrees that we're making. We have cut deals now with 3 different companies that we will be providing their principal rebreather controllers. The second way that I've always been able to compete with everybody is I don't care what rebreather you own. I don't care what rebreather you like. You like an Inspiration, we make an Inspiration in Hammerhead. We'll make an Inspiration Tiger Shark. You want a Megalodon, we'll have a Tiger Shark for Megalodon. We'll have a Tiger Shark for Kiss. We'll have a Tiger Shark for Revo. We'll have a Tiger Shark for any rebreather that's out there. We wind up adapting our set to it and using that as a marketing tool. So new rebreathers will be carrying the Tiger Sharks. We will continue to support our existing customer base, which is pretty significant. And then we will also have the ability to move into the new markets with the advanced features of the Tiger Shark. For example, one of the things that we're doing in the Tiger Shark is Wi-Fi. The Tiger Shark now will connect to your computer, will connect to your home router, it'll connect to the Wi-Fi for updates, software updates, for logging potentially in the future, a cloud type of based service, things like that. So rather than try to just keep up with what our competitors are doing, we decided to leapfrog of what they've done. And so that's how I intend to compete.
Where did the name Hammerhead come from?
A lot of people wonder where the Hammerhead name came from. And it's obvious, of course, Hammerhead Shark. But that's not really what it's named for. One of the earliest supporters I ever had in this business, a fantastic guy by the name of Tom Mount. Everybody knows Tom. Tom was an early proponent of every rebreather. If it was a new rebreather, he wanted it. And he had asked me if I was able to put my rebreather controller on an Inspiration. He had a AP Valves Inspiration. Not to bash anybody, he didn't like the electronics. He asked me if I could put mine on it. And I said, well, I don't know. I've never seen one. Send it to me. So he sent me the whole machine. And I got a chance to take a look at it. And I realized, based upon the design of the Inspiration, if I took the head off of it, if I could reproduce that head, then I wouldn't need to mess with anything. I didn't have to get into their guts. I didn't have to use their wiring. I didn't have to do any of that. So I contacted a good friend of mine named Alex Juergensen, who is just a brilliant machinist. He owned a machine shop in Lorton, Virginia. He was just a fantastic person. And I said, hey, can you make me a head that will go on an Inspiration can? And so we worked on it, and we came up with some ideas together and where to put a pressure transducer, because that was up in the air, things like that. And eventually we built a head. And Tom said, well, when are you going to send it to me? And I said, well, working on integrating the electronics into it. I got to figure out how to seal them. I have to figure out this. I have to figure out that, all kinds of things. Well, anybody who knew Tom knows that he's very persistent. And he would call me like every day, every other day. I would get a call from Tom Mount. And he'd be like, well, how's my thing coming? How's my rebreather coming? And one day I was frustrated because I had tried to do some epoxy sealing, as I recall, and it had just flowed all over the place and made a god-awful mess. And So I said to Tom, I said, I'm putting it together with a hammer and glue. And and he was totally unfazed. He went, hey, you ought to call it a hammerhead. And so from that point forward, that product was known as the hammerhead. Now, I got to tell the other half of that story because it shows what kind of guy he is. So the day comes, the system's, we tested it on the tape and the bench. Everything's working. I've put it through all the paces that I can do here. It's time to send it to Tom. And Tom says, I said, well, how are you going to test it? I thought he's going to jump in his swimming pool. I thought, what? And he said, no, I'm going to go in the ocean with it. So I'm like, oh, Jesus, he's going to go in the ocean with it, So all day long, I know he was diving this particular day, and I was nervous about it. So I was kind of waiting, and I didn't get a call. So finally, I couldn't stand it anymore, and I sent Tom an email. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And instead of getting an email back from Tom, I get an email back from Patty, his wife, Patty Mount. And she says, Kevin, this is Patty, Tom's wife. Tom went out this morning with a unit, and we haven't heard from him since. And I shit myself. I'm walking around here, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the guy that killed Tom out. And it was just like, oh no, what happened, right? I'm trying to think what may have gone wrong. And then I hear bing on my computer, and it's another email, and it's from Patty again. And the second email is from Patty, and it says, Kevin, this is the real Patty. Tom has my email password. He's fine. She said, don't worry, my pet name for him is Asshole. That's the famous Tom Mount story with the very first hammerhead. He loved it. It worked great for him. He had a wonderful time. He wanted to go dive it. And eventually I replaced that. I got the original, which sits on a shelf in my shop. And I sent him a production model. And he dove every model of hammerhead after that. So,
what was the original concept of the Tiger Shark?
So the original concept of the Tiger Shark was to have a unit that was small enough, powered by a AA battery, that has a flush fitting on the side, so this could be used as a standalone dive computer for open circuit trimix nitrox. The next concept was to have a unit that could be used with an 18650 battery for longer duration. We have an awful lot of customers who have 18650 batteries because of their scooters, their cameras, their other devices that they use. And once again, to have a blanking plug. Then the next iteration is, instead of a blanking plug, we add a cable connector. The cable connector enables us to hook it into, in this case, is a Mark 15.5 pod. And this Tiger Shark now, with this cable running into it, controls a heads-up display and a solenoid, as well as reading all 3 oxygen sensors. So theoretically, a person who starts off with a standalone Tiger Shark can eventually upgrade to a Tiger Shark that's a full controller O2 sensor analyzer. So when we built this, we wanted to be able to have one product that a diver could push through and use for all their different types of diving. There's a lot of shearwaters out there that control solenoids and heads-up displays. There are some that are just standalone dive computers. There are some that just PPO2 monitor. The Tiger Shark does all of those.
Describe some of the features of the Tiger Shark.
So one of the features that we have on the Tiger Shark, it goes back to something I did with the Rev D Diva, the display integrated vibrating alarm, our patented heads-up display. When there was a cave diver, and I won't mention his name, but he died in a cave one day, not diving our system. I believe he was on another company's system. But I remember talking to the divers that were with him, and they said that they had looked over at him, and he was looking at his system, and he seemed to be fine. 1 second, and then the next second they looked back and he was sinking. He was dead. And I remember thinking to myself, how could we have possibly helped in that situation? So we took the Rev D Diva, the display integrated vibrating alarm, and I decided to put a red and white LED facing away from the diver on the system so that if there is an oxygen emergency, either high or low, the Diva will go red, white, and it's impossible for anybody to look at that and not see it. It's super bright. Anyone in a cave, anybody in the vicinity would notice that diver is having problems, and they can go and render assistance. Can they help them, see what they could do? So while that feature was in there as a safety thing, I also started thinking, well, what else could we do with it? And I had heard lots of stories from my cave diving buddies who had lost primary lights in caves and had gotten blacked out before. And so I thought, well, we've got this ultra bright white LED on the heads up display. How about we put a light feature on the electronics where you can actually just turn on the white light, and now you can use it as as to find the line or something like that. And of course, at first I thought it was just a gimmick, but okay, who knows if anybody will ever use it, but it's there. Well, over the next couple of years, I was hearing from people who actually used it in caves and said, oh, thanks, man. I'm so glad you put that in there because, I was able to find the line. My primary light blew out, whatever reasons that they were without a light in a cave. That thing came in handy and helped them in some way. So when we were designing the Tiger Shark, we knew that we were going to have it be ambidextrous. There was a port on this side, a port on that side. So you could have it on the left or on the right, or you could have it on the left. And that meant that there would be an open port. And so I had this idea to include a port that has an LED in it. So if you have this unit on your wrist, you can actually use it as a flashlight to see where you're going. Not a very bright flashlight. Obviously, it's not going to replace your primary source of illumination. But in the event of an emergency, if you needed it, or if you're trying to signal your buddy somehow or something, you have it on this. So this feature, it makes this system sort of unique. And it's a callback to the Rev D Diva, that feature that we had put on there, and that had actually saved some people in the past. So I wanted to do that on here. The other window that's on this electronics goes all the way back to my Mark 16 diving days, when the primary display would be on my wrist and would angle itself on the side. Usually if I was wearing a dry suit, it would get on the side. So the only way to look at the display would be to physically grab it and rotate it over and look what the condition of the lamps are. Or in this case, look at the condition on the screen. And so when we developed the hammerhead, I had the engineers put a side-facing LED on the side of the unit that shined through a little window, so that in the event of an emergency, high oxygen, low oxygen, some kind of emergency situation, the LED would shine through here. So if for some reason, I'll put it on this side, if for some reason it's on the side of your wrist, you'll always see that little Fresnel lens. You'll be able to tell, the unit will signal you that there's something wrong. Take a look at the screen and see what's happening with your system. So those two little devices, add-ons to this, kind of show the way that we try to think about safety in rebreather diving. We always try to anticipate what could go wrong with a diver and imagine, is there some way that we could do something to help them to at least survive that event? So that's part of what goes into the Tiger Shark.
Describe how David Shaw was killed at Bushman's Hole when he did his 880-foot dive with the Mark 15.5 using the Juergensen Marine electronics.
The whole Dave Shaw situation. Let me tell you the story about what Dave Shaw. Dave was a fantastic fella. I really liked him. We got along well. He had bought a Mark 15.5, and he had me do the restoration on it, the original restoration on the set. And then once he got it back, he took it to South Africa, and he wound up doing this mega cave dive, super deep. And he called me afterwards. He told me, he said that he didn't call me beforehand because he knew I'd be pissed. And so he went ahead and did the dive. And on that dive, as everybody knows, he found a body. He found this fella, Dion Dreyer. When Dave told me about it, he said that he had told the family that he was going to go back and retrieve Dion's body. When we were in discussion with it, I suggested to him, I said, why don't you just tie a rope off on the manifold, because Dion was wearing manifold doubles, and, yank him up from there. And he said he had grabbed the manifold and tried to pull it, but it was stuck in the mud. And he said, I started breathing heavy, and I realized it's not such a good idea at 800 feet, whatever it was, 880 feet. So he had come up with this elaborate idea. He wanted me to work on his set again, make sure everything was set up. On the dive that he died on, my personal opinion, I wasn't there, but my personal opinion is that he was very distracted by all the press, by all the celebrity about it, everybody talking about it. And he made what turns out to be a very simple mistake. This is the scrubber of a Mark 16, Mark 15.5. There's a little cap that goes in here that it's off for right now. It's unimportant. And the scrubber material is located inside of this housing. And when you exhale into the unit, the exhaled air goes into these holes on the bottom, passes through the carbon dioxide scrubber, and then emerges on top of these holes here. Some of that airflow goes into vents that are cut into the center section along the outside of this. Some of it passes through the middle where the 3 oxygen sensors are located. In order to keep moisture, because of the exothermic reaction that goes on inside of a CO2 scrubber, in order to keep the moisture from wetting the carbon dioxide scrubber, there's 2 pieces that go on this on the top. There's 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. The first is a plastic mesh, and the purpose of the plastic mesh is to maintain these holes, keep these holes beneath open. The second, of course, is the absorbent pad. Now, this absorbent pad sits up against the Perspex dome of the center section, and it's not really for water absorption so much. It will absorb a little bit of water, but generally it's to keep everything compact. There's another set. I'll use the same ones, but there's another set on the bottom of the rebreather that should be set up exactly the same. Plastic absorbent pad. Dave made one very simple mistake. This. When you make that mistake, now all of a sudden, these holes that are on the bottom are covered by this absorbent pad. It increases the work of breathing. When you do it again on the top, as he did, now you've doubled that effect. I can tell you from firsthand experience, if you do this on the surface, you won't notice it. It makes no difference. It feels like nothing. Going down 100, 200 feet, it still feels like nothing. 800, 900 feet is where it really mattered. That's where the density of the air was such that ultimately the carbon dioxide in his lungs built up, the work of breathing built up to be so hard, especially when he was, that parachute cord had tied into him to the body, that he began to panic. And with panic, you get more hypercapnia, and that was it. Something as simple as that. And the thing about rebreather diving that a lot of people who don't know about rebreathers, a lot of people who are not rebreather divers, is that it's always the tiniest little mistake that you make that cascades into a fatality. It's not usually just the only thing. It's usually a bunch of things. In Dave's case, it was this mistake here, on top of the fact that he decided to, instead of what I had recommended, and he decided to cut the body away, wrap the body in a silk case, tie it up with parachute cord. And that parachute cord wound up being the thing that got wrapped around his light and held him down. You just never know. There's no room for error in any of this. And so that's what happened to Dave. He was a great guy. I really liked him a lot. And unfortunately, that's how he met his end.